Welcome to Conversate, a podcast where we engage in conversation. On this episode, I have special guest Trish Brewer on the show with me as we talk about the journey that we've been making through the book of Mark. Trish is a recent member here at St. Peter and Paul, and she'll share some of her background in coming here and also what she does for a living and how that intersects with this gospel that we've been reading. As you listen to this conversation, I hope you take us up on the invitation to consider what barriers might be there for you in your faith walk with God. And you might take the invitation as well to spend a few moments with God and to rest in His grace, His goodness, and His call for all of us to follow Him on the way. We hope you enjoy it. Well, hello.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. If you're listening right now, you probably just recognize that this voice does not belong to the Aaron Gerke.
How do you know? How can you tell?
Well, because I talk to Aaron a lot. I hear his voice a ton. And I'm not going to make commentaries about, the tone of your voice and the tone of his voice and the differences I see in them.
Well, I'm from Savannah, Georgia. So that's the difference, right? The southern accent is the biggest change.
I don't think I knew that about you, Trish.
I don't have much of an accent, if I'm being honest. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a transplant.
How long did you live in Savannah, Georgia?
Well, I'm from there. I went to grad school in Philadelphia in 2007 and 2009, and then I moved up here a little bit in 2018. So a while I was in Georgia.
A while in Georgia, in Philly,
yeah.
And then only up here since 2018.
Yeah.
So you're new like me.
Yeah, the Father's Day flood, I signed for my house the weekend after.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, so it did not get damaged in the flood when I bought my first house up here.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
And where was your first house?
Oh, it was on Elm Street in Hancock, and it was a beautiful house, but it wasn't big enough for my family when I met and married my husband. So
okay, man,
I had to get rid of it.
This is awesome because, so this is my own thing right now, but as a pastor, as a person, you have interactions with people, and you meet them and you see them and you talk to them, but there's so much I don't know about you, Trish.
Yeah.
There's so much I don't know about you.
And I know so much about you because I listen to this podcast. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, it's a little frightening. Feel free to use anything you've heard against me. Well,
I know that you like Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter.
Yes.
And my husband, who is currently, he's about 10 episodes ahead of me on the podcast. So we both been listening to from the beginning. Mm-hmm. I'm on episode 50 and he's at episode around 66. No, he's at 20 episodes ahead of me. He's like, oh, there's an episode where he talks about Lord of the Rings that you're really going to like, Trish. And so I'll get that. So yeah, I came in prepared.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were living in Hancock on Elm Street. Was Fifth and Elm still over there at the time?
No, it was not.
Okay, see, I don't know my own history of this area.
Fifth and Elm, I think, actually started in Calumet, Michigan.
That's right.
On the corner of Fifth and Elm, which is now, I think, a bakery, which is delicious.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ramona's Bakery.
So, and then you met John. How did you meet John?
So, this might need to be, we met on Tinder.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I always liked it because it was a very honest app and people in other apps would lie about what they were interested in. I wanted a relationship and I wanted to have my own child. And I said that to John before we even met. I was on the way. I was not texting and driving. But I was on the Youper Loop when this conversation happened through text message.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And he said, I have children. And I said, oh, well, I like kids and I want kids of my own. So I would want at least one biological kid. And he said, I would love that. But I do have 4 kids right now. I'm like, that's great because I've always wanted a big family. And so so we decided to have Winnie back in 2020, when we first met, right before the world ended. And so we already had planned what we were up to. So now I've got 5 beautiful children, only one of which I gave birth to, which is the way to do it, if you want a big family, have them start ahead of you.
Just jump right. Exactly. My wife would probably agree with that based on, I shouldn't say that, Molly, I'm sorry, but she's not listening right now. No. I don't think. If she is, I'll find out later.
You'll find out.
But that process is a doozy, that I will never experience.
It was something. It was good. I really enjoyed it. Hoping to have more, but shout out to the Portage and to the nurses at Portage, and they were fantastic for me. I felt like I was the star of the show. I was the only mother in the wing when Winnie was born for about 4 days. So it was amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just full service.
It was great.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, yeah. Okay. So just context if you're listening, this might be your first time meeting Trish.
Hi.
It's not my first time, but I'm learning so much. But Trish, you and John, you got connected to this congregation, what, maybe like a little over a year ago?
Yeah, about a little bit over a year ago. Yeah. I was pregnant with Winifred, and who you may have seen at church because she really likes to talk during sermons. and she's very loud. I think she gets it from me. So she's the baby with brown eyes and no hair. That's 11 months old. 11 months old yesterday. I was pregnant with her, and John and I kind of had this moment where we're like, we've got to baptize this baby when the baby comes. And I said, yeah, but I want to be a member of the church. And we had talked about coming to this church. And I think we might have gone, no, it was even before we'd even gone to any services here. We had gone to other churches before COVID happened. And then we got married and we never made it like a part of like our schedule. And finally we're like, there's a baby coming. We have to baptize the baby. And it coincided with our youngest Eden wanting to learn more about her own spiritual life. And so we started coming. It was about a year from when we actually finally signed up for being members of the church. So it was about a year and a month ago.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, and that's so you may have seen Trish either in person, and John and the family too, either in person or perhaps via email, depending what service you go to, because they were up front.
Yeah.
What, a couple months ago?
No, but it was yes, it was about a month ago.
Yeah, I lose track of time.
It was
quickly.
February 18th. No, it was the weekend after February 18th.
Oh, wow. So that was really recent then.
Yeah.
The new member welcome we're talking about.
Yeah, it was. It was really recent.
Yeah. And then when he was baptized recently as well.
That was the same day. Oh, it was great. I loved it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And and thanks for just being a part of our community.
Yeah.
One thing I like about this podcast is the times when we do get to sit down with just different folks, when we've kind of had different guest people on the show, because you bring such a different... you guys hear from Aaron and I a lot. So it's fun to hear a different voice.
Yeah.
The church has always been a community of people. And I think our individual stories, as we share them with one another, is really useful too, right? In the development of our faith and our spiritual journeys. And so I'm kind of curious to hear from you, Trish, just kind of centering it to, not yet to the Transfiguration, although we can talk about that, if you wanna. But I'm kind of curious, just this Lenten season, right? We've been walking through the Gospel of Mark, and
that's been really fun, by the way. I really like the book. I love the translation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, tell me more. So, what's unique about this translation versus others you have experienced?
So, just a little bit about my background. As an undergraduate at Emory, I was a philosophy and religion major, and I was very interested in early Judaism, Christianity, Islam, especially early Christianity, early medieval. And in graduate school, I studied Augustine of Hippo, and from a philosophical context, but he is one of the big founders of a lot of our Christian theology we use today, is very influential for Luther. And so that's my background's coming from a very... well-founded background, right? And so, but with that came a lot of conceit, I think, if I want to say, or pride, like a barrier, I could say, of being open to new ideas. And I came to the party, coming here, I already had read Mark in Greek. And so it was and I've taken, I took ancient Greek back in the day in undergrad, and I studied a little bit more in college, and then, studied Latin in graduate school, and have more language background than that. But, so I came in already prepared to not like, things. And that was a bit of a journey that I've been on as a Christian, I think, but since joining this conversation, since our first conversation, I remember it. And I just, I'm really grateful for the ability to grow. So I say that to say that I have a big opinions, or have had big opinions on translations. And one of the issues with translations in Mark is that Mark is a very harried gospel. Like it's like there's some people, the tradition is that it's the first one written down, and we were writing it down, and it's very, very fast. We're moving fast, we're going fast. It's very like, you can just tell that they're thirsty and hungry and traveling and tired, and things are happening so quickly. And I love that comes across in this translation. In a lot of translations, it's made to sound a little bit more eloquent.
Ah, okay.
Right?
Like kind of polished, yeah.
Polished, but it's not. Like you've read it probably, and have you read the Greek as well as in the full text, or is it?
So here's this is Pastor Kevin confession time. I know about Greek. I can identify the letters of Greek. Yeah. I cannot read Greek.
Oh.
No.
Really?
I mean, I studied it in seminary.
Yeah.
And I would like to continue to improve upon my Greek. Hebrew, that language, for whatever. Well, there are some particular reasons why Hebrew came a little better for me.
Yeah.
There are qualifying exams when you enter into the seminary. And if you pass your Greek or your Hebrew, and then they have some on Old and New Testament and Christian theology. If you pass those things, you're incentivized in a couple ways: scholarship form, and also not having to take classes.
Yeah.
I had no chance of passing Hebrew because I hadn't studied it at all, but I had been being tutored in Greek ahead of seminary. You get 3 chances to take those entrance exams. Like you can fail twice. Yeah. I failed miserably. I failed less miserably. And then I passed by the skin of my teeth, which meant I never took classroom Greek.
So a little for me, I also failed my graduate school Greek exams. I know, shock and horror. It was the drama. It's not my fault. And Aristotle is way more difficult than Koine Greek from the Bible.
Sure.
But to say, I totally get the feeling. I switched to Latin, but I had most of my background was in Greek. Actually, I took the classroom Greek and the classic Greek. Because again, I was like, if I learn the classic Greek, then I won't have to have a trouble with learning Koine Greek, which is so much easier. But should have just learned Koine Greek. It's so much. Koine means common. It's the Greek of Jesus and his followers.
Yeah, the New Testament.
When they would use it in the New Testament.
Right. Was that kind of the lingua franca as well?
Yeah, it's like English is now. And in Latin, before English became you can go to Germany or Sweden and go to Asia, and like people will be able to speak, like when I lived in Japan, people could speak a little bit of English there too, and all over the world, it just is the language of commerce. And so it's the same with Greek in Jesus' day.
Yeah, in the ancient
Even
day.
though the Romans were the ones in charge, the Romans would have been speaking in Greek.
Okay, yeah,
right.
Not Latin, right? Which would have been their language.
Yeah, their language would have been Latin, but a lot of Romans would have been from like other parts of the empire.
Sure.
Right. And so even if they were citizens, their native language would have been some other language. And so the common tongue in Rome was Latin. But if you're trading and stuff like that, you're going to be using Greek because of just the history. There's a long history of it, but
sure. Well, yeah, and actually, I guess I think the term for that long history, in part, is what Hellenistic or Hellenism.
Yeah, Hellenis is Greek for Greece.
Yes. Right? Okay. I didn't know that actually. Yeah. And it sort of describes the process, which started with Alexander the Great. Yeah. Was a big. This is BC times, like 260-ish, something like that. And what happened was, as Greece became this major power, right, they started bringing other nations into their culture. So, like, enculturating them. And so I think that's probably one of the major reasons why Greek was a common language, right?
Yeah, because, Alexander would go on and conquer the known world at the time. And and then it becomes, once commerce gets involved, and we're trading and stuff. And
where the money happens.
Yeah, it's where the money happens. The same reason why Latin became so popular afterwards, because eventually Greek goes out of favor, and it's the Latin of the church, actually, of the at the time Catholic Church, but then the church in general, where people are, writing to each other. But, if you have 40 different languages or 100 different languages, it's way easier to only speak in Latin to each other than to figure out you speak a dialect of Brittany and you speak a dialect of German, and these things don't go together. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is really fascinating. I mean, just sort of the historical movement from what you might say was like a fractured world to an increasingly global community in our day.
Yeah. And there's like this idea of a globalization kind of exists back then too.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like you'd still have that the trade routes and things like that.
Sure.
But yeah, to go back to Mark, I always loved that gospel because of its harriedness, and you're supposed to. And I'm a big fan of puns, and the Bible's full of puns. And well, you would know from the Hebrew, although I don't know Hebrew, but I know that the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, is just full of like delicious, terrible puns. And Mark, I think, has some of the best ones in the Bible, which mostly involve feet and walking and the way, hodos. Right, you follow Jesus on the way. Hodos is the Greek for the way.
Yep.
And as an undergraduate, something about it tickled me of like all these tales of Mark involve picking stuff up and following Jesus, and Jesus is walking on the way. Like he's walking, he's on the way, he's on the path, and that path is towards death and resurrection in the world that's to come. But I was always I always loved that in Mark, and I think that really comes across that things happen suddenly, they happen excitingly, and that's why I've loved doing this reading activity. I like homework. I'm a professor, so yeah. I love that I have church homework.
Well, yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah. And it does hit on, I think Aaron, and maybe in the first message as we got into Mark, that very first Sunday, talked about that word immediately, which is kind of what you're getting at. It's like action-packed in Mark and things. It's like boom, boom,
I
boom.
would say suddenly, but immediately is the same. No, it's the same. The Trish translation. No, I mean, suddenly, immediately, what I like is that it's always translated as immediately, because some place they'll try to change it to different words to make it not seem like he's saying the same that
over and
Mark
over.
Is writing. No, but it's and then this up and this up and this up. It's like it's suddenly. It's immediately is the same way. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to make this comment earlier, and I'll make it now. Just to clarify for people, because sometimes there's this idea that's like, wow, yeah, well, this is, you guys are talking about one of the reasons why it's so hard to trust the Bible, because how can you trust something that's been translated and retranslated and retranslated and retranslated? But that is not the reality, right? So any translation that's coming out, whether it's the ESV or the Trish translation, we're all working from the same Greek texts that we have. I mean, now there's a handful of manuscript schools and stuff, but it's not as if it's not a big game of what's that game where you can sit in a circle? Telephone.
Well, yeah, telephone.
Yeah,
Whispers or something.
Oh, do you call it Whispers? I always call it telephone. I play Telephone Pictionary sometimes. You ever play that one?
No, it sounds like fun.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I know your family's into word games.
Yeah,
this one's more artsy, but the idea is, you write a phrase on a piece of paper, okay? And everyone's doing this at the same time. And you have the number of papers equivalent to how many people are playing. So you write your phrase, all right? And then you pass your sheets of paper to the left. And then the next person sees that phrase, they put it on the bottom of the stack, and now they're going to artfully depict what they saw.
Wow, that sounds hard.
It is.
I'm really bad. So my family's into word games. I'm bad at them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you might do better at this one.
Yeah, maybe. I don't think I would be, though. I'm not very good with certain types of games. Other strategy games I'm a little bit better in. I've always beaten my husband at Risk.
Okay.
But I never play Monopoly with him
goodness.
because I have a problem and I can't play that game.
So this is hearkening back to a piece of our conversation prior to when we got on the podcast here. But have you ever played Lord of the Rings Risk?
No.
Did you know it existed?
I didn't. That sounds like so much fun.
It is fantastic. I have barely played it because it takes so long.
Not the way I play Risk.
Yeah. You're hardcore.
I just destroy. That's
just
the
go.
way. No.
You Alexander the Great it.
Yeah, I know. I learned from the best.
There is a Lord of the Rings Risk.
That's fantastic.
It's cool because the map is all Middle Earth, and there's also this side plot where instead of just trying to take territories, you're actually following the path of the ring to Mordor.
Really fun.
Yeah, so we'll put it.
We'll have to play that at some point
when our kids are old enough that we can do things again with our lives.
Yeah, one of those days.
One of those days
in the future. Well, I was thinking, I bet there's be enough people interested in doing a Greek reading group that we could do a Greek reading group at some point.
My goodness. Well, that was the other comment I wanted to make was I got to introduce you. Have you met Don Kuiper?
No.
Did he sit down with us No, I don't.
I hope not, because then I don't. No, I'm terrible with names as well.
That's okay. That was a different table yesterday. But Don Kuiper is our facilities manager here at St. Peter and Paul. You may have seen him, but he does go to the 11 service. But he's a taller, slender fellow. But he loves languages.
Oh yeah,
loves languages. So he would be very intrigued by your learnedness in other languages.
So learned. That's what I am.
Okay, so Mark, we're working through this harried gospel, and this harried gospel where there's an emphasis on the way, and that was a real emphasis this last Sunday, where Jesus takes the disciples up onto the Mount of Transfiguration, but then they're going to come back down, right? That's not the way, if you will.
Yeah, all they want to do is like build tents and like do all this stuff, and it's like you're going to just hang out there? Like, you think that Jesus wants to just like chill up there and not go and do the things that he needs to do? Like, I always like that. The disciples are such dummies in Mark, and they are
very relatable.
Well, yeah, like
for me.
Well, yeah, I get it though, because I totally get it. Like, they're all like, I was thinking a lot about our previous readings before, like during the sermon. I was thinking a lot about how, Jesus was up on a different mountain doing different things alone when he sends the disciples on the boat, and they're scared on the boat and
That's
they're terrified.
Right. Yeah.
And he's like walking. He's just like on a walk. He's walking over the water, but it's the first time I really looked at that and really saw what was happening, where the disciples are there and they've been trying to cross this water for like the entire time that Jesus has gone on a walk up a mountain, prayed a bunch, and is coming down, and it's just intending to walk past them.
That's right.
And walk to the other side. And they're like, what's happening, Jesus? I'm so scared. And he's like, he doesn't want to, like he was going to go on his way. And he stops to help the disciples, to help them learn. And I was thinking about that a lot reading this passage again, where he's up on a different mountain. He's brought some of them up there, and they're just like, let's build this is great. Let's build some tents. There's time for that.
Yeah. So
time.
The disciples are like laughably, right? Offbeat or off course, or having hard times, or not getting it.
That's where I would be if I was a disciple too. Like, that's what I like about it. 'Cause he just keeps, let me explain this very clear parable that anyone with half a brain cell could be able to tell, but I'll explain it to you in detail, disciples, because you're not getting it. I'm like, thank you, because sometimes I'm that way too. A lot of times. And maybe I should spend more time realizing that about myself.
Yeah, well, and I think that's exactly it, though. You're talking about their relatability, because it's, sometimes we read the scriptures and we think, oh, yeah, I guess if I was in their shoes, back then I saw this, like, well, you can go two ways. Sometimes we say, how did they miss, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if I was there and I saw this stuff, I'd believe, But I think there's a different sense, which is the reality that Jesus, he still is our way, right? We are still actively disciples, and there's still so much that we miss.
All the time.
Right?
Yeah.
And yet you're kind of commenting, I think, on the character of Jesus, which is compassionate, I guess, in a word, right? There's lots of things we could say about Jesus, but one thing that definitely comes through is when he looks at his poor disciples, arguing about who's the greatest.
I know.
And
you just know that you could so see that conversation happening. Like, I have teens at home and kids, and you could just see, like, these people that you love, that you care about, that you're trying to get them to this next stage, and they're arguing over some nonsense, and you're like, what is this conversation you're having right now, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can almost, I think, see, right, like, where you want, those under your care to be, and you can see that they can be that, like, they can grow into this. But then they're stuck or they're fixated on something. You're like, this is so beneath you guys. You know what I mean?
I always, one thing that's kind of coming into my mind in this conversation is that so often I have read in terms of, look how silly these guys are, but I'm realizing how much I've put myself from the perspective of Jesus, because we have the perspective of hindsight.
Right.
Right. But when reality, we're so enmeshed in the world that it makes sense that the disciples do the things that they do and say the things that they say, that they still care about who is the best disciple of Jesus. Judas wasn't, though. He was definitely the worst.
Fairly definitively. Poor Judas.
I always felt bad for him.
Yeah.
Like, because you can never undo. There's some things you can't undo. But perhaps there's like a place for forgiveness for even Judas, but he'd have to he kind of ended it before he could come to that place himself.
Yeah, I've kind of heard the comparison between Judas and Peter, right? They both misstep in very similar directions.
Yeah.
There's both betrayal, a disowning of who they claim to have followed, but Peter Jesus really returns to Peter. But Peter's kind of, I guess, open or available to meet with them. They talk on the beach. They have that sort of reconciliation where Jesus is saying, like, I know what you did, know? And it's heart-wrenching for Peter.
Yeah.
And I guess there was that, when Peter walks out, he hears the rooster crows and he weeps bitterly, right? And that's a different reaction to it's a different reaction to one's mistakes, right? Like sort of regret, but that doesn't seek to resolve the wrong action by taking another action.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Sometimes we just have to sit in our sorrow and regret and accept our regret. I think that Peter, it's when I was a younger lass and reading the doing my studies and things like that, it was so fun to look down on Peter as well. He denied Jesus, even though he's about to be murdered by a giant crowd of people, and it makes total sense why he would do it.
Yeah.
And then his that regret, it's so beautiful in a way that we have this image of someone that would later go on and be so important. And because without Peter, would we have Christianity the way it is today? Like, he is so incredibly important for us as a people, and he's a flawed person.
Yeah.
And Jesus loved him.
That's right. Yeah. And that's the beauty of the gospel, right? Is like, Peter has done these terrible things. He's flawed, right? Yeah. He's made these huge mistakes. And yet, two things. One, he's going to go on to basically mirror Jesus in Acts, right? He's going to go and stand before trial, and he's going to be bold and confident, and he won't call curses down upon Jesus. And so that's amazing to see this transformation that happens for Peter because of the power of Jesus' forgiveness and of his Spirit. But also that story of Peter is included in the Gospels because those are written clearly after these events happened, right?
Yeah.
They weren't written before they happened, which means that in the Christian community, there was such a graciousness and a humility that it wasn't, we need to cover up these stories and present ourselves in a particular way.
Yeah.
But rather, because of the forgiveness we've experienced from God, we're free. And we're free even to share and talk about, and there's appropriate ways to do that, but share and talk about these things that are not good.
Yeah.
It's
I've been thinking about this a lot when we think about these guys and Jesus is trying to work with them and teach with them, and then he dies for them and, for all of us. But there's just, in some ways, when I was a kid, the disciples were the disciples. They were not, I'm sure that they were discussed when I was going to church, but I don't recall many stories of the disciples. And quite frankly, I recall a lot of stories about like made up stories, like the pastor stories that come up sometimes, like, let me tell you about my friend and his life, and it's all just made up
but
stuff.
It's a fabricated kind of,
and it's clearly because they all have the same kind of beats. I went to one Christmas sermon I went to, it was, instead of telling the story of Jesus or a disciple or anything else, it was the story of, it was basically the minister had fabricated a version of the drummer boy, but it was a little girl. And it was like just this story of the shepherdess who was following this thing. And it's like, there's actual shepherds you could have talked about that are in the Bible. Like there's like a whole story. So the things I love about coming to church is that, again, it's like study time. And I like studying, but I like how embedded in the Bible here at Saints Peter and Paul is, because that's where we should be, and there's stories enough in the Bible that we don't understand or know, that we don't need to add made up stories all the time to make sense of it. But yeah, like that's such a beautiful thing to think about about how Peter represents both the worst of us, but also the best of us in so many ways, and how beautiful that is.
Yeah. Well, okay. So this is a total divergence, but you just made me think of this movie I saw. You ever seen the movie Spirited?
With the horse?
No, but great reference. Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron. Yeah. My daughter loves that movie. No, okay, so this is a relatively new movie. It's called Spirited.
Okay.
And it's a play on the Scrooge, the classic Christmas Carol.
Oh, I haven't seen that one yet.
It's a musical
it good?
It's niche. Okay, it's a Christmas movie musical, but Will Ferrell and Ryan Reynolds
That's exactly my style.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I love it.
Because I feel it's like a very small target.
No, I'm the target. I'm the target.
Well, yeah, you should watch it.
Okay.
I really liked it. And I don't want to spoil it for you, but like this is pretty much right out of the gate. Like the premise of the movie is, these people are working to try, kind of like the Christmas Carol, right? Where what the ghost that visits Scrooge is to help him basically redeem his past.
Yeah.
Right? Like he's become this old curmudgeon-y guy, right? And so this movie, Spirited, it's a play on that. And there's like this whole corporation, if you will, this whole organization that's seeking to redeem the unredeemable.
Oh.
Okay. Well, actually, that plays into the movie, but there are certain people who are considered unredeemable. But then there's this one guy who's like, no, we should go for this guy.
It.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but that is like the gospel story. It is this, what you were saying about the best of us and the worst of us. When you hear those categories, listener, talking to you, listener, when you hear those categories, don't think the best of us as in all the people over here who are really, morally good and upright, and then worst of us as all the people over here who are just really bad, because the dichotomy is within us.
Yes.
Right?
And we know that. And I think that's something that I've always struggled with. The expression that I hate the most is love the sinner, hate the sin.
Okay.
And there's the other one. And really the reason for that is it sort of, I feel like when people say that, or when people say, I'm the biggest sinner of them all. Notice the Southern comes out because that's where I grew up.
Yeah, that was the most Georgia you sounded so far.
It's like, I'm the, I just love the sinner, hate the sin. But, I will say that I'm the biggest sinner of them all. But people, when they say that, they don't necessarily mean it. And that's something that really frustrated me as a younger person. And it really dampened down my Christian faith for many years. And I was thinking about the hiding of, do we hide who we are? And it's like, in a lot of ways I've hid who I was because of that, like, vibe being terrible, because if it's not meant, because when I say that I'm a sinner, like my husband likes to say, like I break all 10 commandments every day, right? Well, and he picked it up from his minister, and he believed his minister when he said it. And it's taken me a while in my journey to like come to accept when I hear, especially in this podcast, when you or Pastor Aaron talk about frustration or something like that, and I'm like, it's a minister actually talking about the sin, and not saying it in that way, but but that's part of us, who we are, because we're fallen beings and we sin, and there's got to be room to, even as a baptized Christian member of a church, to say that, man, I really donked it this week. Like I didn't do a great job. But then to pray and ask for, and not just ask for forgiveness, but know that you're forgivable and forgiven, because that's what Jesus does. Yeah. And that's what he did for us.
Amen.
Yeah.
I think, Trish, part of what I hear you saying is it's possible for certain phrases even to become overused or made into cliches, where they no longer express what they're really intended to. Yeah. Because, right, the same, St. Paul will say, chief of sinners, right? Yeah. I'm the chief of sinners. But, I mean, then he also lays out what he did in his life.
Yeah, he that's helped people get killed and beaten and would drag them out. I reread Acts recently because I realized it's been a minute, and I don't know that I'd even ever read all of Acts in a row. And probably throughout the course of my life, I've read all of it. But I decided to reread it. And man, when they bring up, this guy Saul is a real jerk.
Well, then when he's going to be included in the community, they're like, what?
Yeah.
Have you heard about what this guy's doing?
Yeah. And the fact that he's so included in the community so quickly, and it's so shocking that. And another thing written down. Now, his letters, a lot of them were written before the Gospels and before the book of Acts. Yep. And it's so amazing to see why he's so chosen and important. And that kind of that it's written down. It was always wild to me that he's writing, because he's writing his letters during his life.
Yeah, developing these churches.
Which is not the longest life. Like when you think about what happened, helping develop churches. And then at the same time, that's when we get like the other gospels are written a little bit after. And during the lives of the gospel writers and, in that generation after Jesus. But it's all like you're trying to get it done as quickly as possible and write things down. And the fact that like Paul is not, I don't know. I always thought of Paul as a cudgel too. Like women don't talk in church.
Oh, sure.
Cover your heads, ladies. Though, before I came to this church, I would say, well, he's specifically talking to a group of women in a particular community that were converted from a faith tradition in which you would put your hair down and speak in tongues, and like there was like a lot of like sexual imagery that was involved in these sort of pagan traditions and these religions that they would come into Christianity and bring in those traditions because that's what they thought of. So when he's talking about women cover your hair and don't speak in church, he's specifically talking to a group of women that are bringing blah blah blah. And then like this time, I didn't bring in the covering my hair, but I really like. When I started coming here after our first conversation, I thought about it and prayed on it afterwards of like, I am putting so much of my background in a way that is just a shield to stop my faith. And what if I just stopped? And so that's where I've been coming from, listening to the podcasts and coming to church and listening to the sermon. And my husband and I talk afterwards about it. And just, I've been trying so much to just sort of bracket my knowledge base in a way, not to be like, let me just like drink your wisdom.
Yeah.
But in a way doing so because it's been a barrier. And like in your sermon this week, you talked about like, I had an offline about like where that's Satan's voice inside of you that stops you from doing something. And in a lot of ways, it's the devil inside me stopping me from being able to listen, to take part. And the biggest thing for me was always the possibility of forgiveness. So hard because obviously I'm the chief of sinners, but maybe I could just forgive myself a little bit, and maybe if Jesus can do it, I can try.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so that's been a big barrier for me. So I've actually taken on this line that like as a feminist scholar, I'm a feminist Christian scholar. That's like I'm a published Christian scholar.
You're a walking oxymoron for a lot of people, right?
Yeah,
like
but
when
they
hear that, they'd
but
be like,
really,
what?
If we had 3 more hours, we could talk about why it's not.
Exactly.
But
yes.
but because like there's actually so much amazing stuff in Augustine. You guys with different podcasts, we'll come and talk about Augustine feminism and why they go together. But yeah, I really I decided to think about what would happen if I decided to be quiet. And a part of that was quieting my own mind when I listened to sermons and when I listened to the podcasts of like allowing a space for what if this was true? And I could tell you when I started doing this exact moment. I'm on a total tangent now. But when Pastor Aaron said he thought that Jesus rode dinosaurs or something equivalent of that, not that, he didn't say that, but the whole thing about the world and being 6,000 years old or whatever. Like I heard that and I was like, And then he mentioned though, and this was in the summer, there was a question and answers.
That's it. Yeah.
And and there's a quick question and I could see the look on his face when he was answering the question. And I've heard that turn because there's like, this is what it says, but then do we know, what's the day to God? But and he's answering and he's saying this and I thought, well, that's just in my mind because obviously I know everything. Well, that's absurd, And then I started thinking about skepticism, about being skeptical. I'm like, I'm being so skeptical. But then I thought about what if I was skeptical, but the other way, and was skeptical of my scientific understanding of the universe. And I was listening because he mentioned that of we believe in science, but what does that belief mean? When we believe in scientism. Yeah. And I was teaching logic at the time last semester. And I went into my logic class and I talked about it with my logic students. And I had a student write to me and it was such, and I mentioned it when we're skeptical, let's actually be more open to arguments that we would never agree with. Cause I would just was no way. Yeah. I still don't. I still kind of am thinking that maybe dinosaurs and Jesus didn't hang out together, or Noah on the boat because there's not a lot of room for dinosaurs, but there's room for that. But at the same time, I had some students write to me and like thank me because they never felt that they could be open about that aspect of their life before. Because some of my students do believe in that.
Sure.
And I thought, wow, like even at Michigan Tech, there's some students that come from this faith tradition. And I was so glad that I didn't just be like, that's dumb.
Oh, sure.
And that's that kind of quieting, being quiet. Yeah. Women, be quiet and don't talk in church.
Moral of the story.
No, everyone. Just listen to Pastor Kevin and Aaron.
Well,
and they'll tell us everything, right?
No, but we'll do our best. But I do think this is a perfect place to kind of coast out. And that would be, honestly, my encouragement to everyone listening right now is two things. Based on what you just said, Trish. One is just find some quiet, like just sit with yourself and not just with yourself, but with God, for, I don't know, a few minutes today or, a few times this week. And one, sort of rest in the amazing truth that we've talked about on this episode that God accepts you regardless of what you have done, regardless. He invites you, he forgives you, and he wants to walk with you and grow you. You're made in his image. And so that's that best of us that he wants us to live into. But secondly, I love that invitation to consider for yourself, what's the barrier for me? And it's going to be probably unique as your thumbprint, like for many of you, it may not have anything to do with skepticism or, scientism. Maybe the barrier is simply my social group. I know they would think differently of me if they knew this about me.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the barrier. Maybe the barrier is I am trying so hard to be, like create order and structure in my home, in my life. But the way I do it is very like power, like I'm exerting a lot of power and force over other people. And I can tell it's damaging to them, but I just keep doing it, and maybe that's the barrier. And it's this invitation to accept Jesus' invitation to be weak, to be humble. Just take a minute, dwell on that.
Yeah.
And we'll keep walking with you as we follow is it Odos? Hodos. It's got that little...
Yeah.
I was always bad at the accents.
Yeah.
Way. That's Greek for way.
Technically not an accent.
What's it called?
I don't know. But it's not an accent because it's the thing that makes an O a ha sound.
Yeah. A marking of some kind. A marking and mark.
I hope my Greek professor from college isn't listening to this.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on, Trish. Thanks so much.
Being here. Thank you.
Cheers to you and to growing together.
Yes, thank you.